Today, per student demand last time, based on the show of hands at the end of class last time, I thought that we would continue our discussion of sort of software startups and software entrepreneurship. And I'm going to try to finish it up today. We do have additional material we want to cover. In addition, we have some likely industry speakers coming in as well to complement the set of voices that you've heard, who will likely bring additional perspectives on startup type contexts as well as sort of commercial software development. Today, though, I wanted to finish up where we had left off. I had been going through a set of mechanisms trying to systematically hit on a lot of the topics that, if you're thinking about getting into a software startup, about actually founding a software startup, you're going to be wanting to think about. And some of those mechanisms are financial in nature. And in fact, I commented on a number of those, and I'm going to expand on it more. We're also going to talk about some legal issues, marketing and sales, which are often hashed to the same bucket by CS folks. Sort of think of it as the slick guys out there in business suits, or the ladies who are off selling product. But it turns out they're rather different, and they're sometimes in tension with each other, and you should understand some aspects of that environment. We'll talk a little bit about the managerial and resource side as well. Okay, so last time I had mentioned some issues with ownership, the way that often early on when a firm is starved for cash, much of the way that they survive is kind of keeping costs lower. And a big way that we achieve that in the software entrepreneurship area is through rewarding people who work for the company, not in dollars. Indeed, in most software contexts, personnel pay is a very large fraction of the overall budget. Here, to keep the costs low, we pay people in equity. We incentivize people as well to stay in terms of equity. And so often there's some division up of equity among the founders, and then people, as they come on, and even the founders themselves, they earn the equity over time. They vest the equity, often with a cliff where if you stay less than a certain amount of time, you don't get anything. More than that, you're earning equity up to some level that caps out. You may also be rewarded with stock options for a firm that's further along and actually has public stock. So there you have the option of purchasing that stock, for example, on as its value was at the time of the starting date. So you're incentivized to try to raise the stock to try to help the company do well. Sometimes these are tied in with contingencies. For example, someone who comes on as a salesperson might receive stock contingent on their performance, how many successful sales they bring in, etc. I talked about some common financing mechanisms, and I distinguished between angel investors and venture capitalists in the sense that angel investors are investing personal money or money of their family. They're typically at a lower sort of scale and often investing less than venture capitalists who are investing funds of some corporation for which they work. Venture capitalists have, in many times, an adverse reputation. Some of them are known as vulture capitalists, who actually look for firms which are struggling and try to swoop in and extract value from those and try to sell them off, perhaps at big dollars for themselves. Sometimes venture capitalists are predatory. Often they are very demanding in terms of the terms and conditions they want to see for this company going forward. So this may mean getting rid of that favored manager in favor of someone that they can install, for example, or really being quite brutal in terms of letting certain elements of the company go, so that they can put in place a management structure that they're comfortable with. So it's a very adversarial relationship often between venture capitalists who take those sort of take such tight control, and the technology folks who are interested in delivering product and achieving technical goals. There's often some tension there. Now, venture capitalists are associated with a very tight market, and it's often a quite asymmetric market. These are old statistics now, and I don't think they're as bad now at all. The chance of hitting a venture capitalist for getting financing from them was less than 1% at one time, and a majority of venture capital funded companies have gone bankrupt. That's not specific to software startups. These days, there's a lot more additional interest in crowdfunding opportunities, where you're trying to raise money not from one firm alone, and not just from angels, but potentially in a context that brings in lots of micro investors. And that's been around for a long time in an informal way. We would tap friends and family and see if they would like to invest. But these days, it's been through sites like Kickstarter and other efforts, it's been made more widely accessible and made more industrialized, as it were. I want to talk a little bit about the financial side in terms of diversity in business models. One issue is sort of products versus services. The degree to which you're primarily a service company, you exist to deliver services to clients out there in the world, versus the degree to which you're delivering product that they own. This is a big difference. If you're delivering services, you're doing so often in a way that makes it easier to put out new versions. You also can more easily charge on an ongoing basis. Selling product, you're often going from gig to gig, from sort of big customer to big customer early on, or you're selling to the mass market. So that's another distinction within products, particularly. Are you selling to individuals and people at a smaller scale? Are you selling to enterprises? Are you selling to big firms? Are your sales hundreds of thousands of dollars each, and a lot of attention goes into making that sale? Or are you selling apps where each person is paying $1 or something like that, and they're individuals? Big differences in how you market, how you sell, how much effort is put into a given sale, to what degree it requires active going to the customer versus putting on a shingle and just letting people see your apps on the App Store or what have you. And along with this is kind of, to what degree are you dealing with mass market, where lots and lots of people might buy your product, versus a very defined niche market very well. You're selling to people with these particular interests, and you map out that market very carefully to know how big it is, to know who the competitors are, what the needs are of that market. With the mass market, it's often hard to know what the demands are out there for product. You're often, in terms of requirements, you think about it, in contrast to your projects, where you've been meeting with the stakeholder and asking what their needs are, trying to understand from them, which features are most important, what things deliver the most value, and what other systems can do. For the mass market, you're often shooting for something that is a new product that no one's out there directly demanding, and so you're not able to get feedback on features, on requirements, of nearly the clarity you can with a niche market, with particularly with enterprise customers. You're kind of groping in the dark for what needs to be in here, and you end up building something that you think will be attractive to a wide set of customers. But unless you've done focus groups, unless you've done market research, maybe you hired a market research firm to look at what the needs are there, you're often in the dark a bit. And a lot of companies early on are a little bit hesitant to invest highly in sort of market research of that sort. There's a further question: to what degree you're a bleeding edge leader in this area, to what degree you're a follower, you're sort of innovating around a space that a few others have gone into, and to what degree you're complementing existing options that are out there. You're not trying to replace them, but you're an add-on that works really well with them. Here we have some distinctions amongst different types of products or different types of services. In terms of pricing strategies, there's a lot of, when you think about creating a business plan, there's a lot of thinking that goes in. How are we going to charge for our innovation? Maybe it's a service. Maybe it's a product. One question that will often come up is, are we going to have one size fits all for pricing, or are we going to allow people to try it out at a much more lightweight way, maybe no cost compared to production use? So do we want to allow people to have a demo version which they can try out, or a version for 60 days of free use, or a version that up to 3 people can use it for free, and after that it costs? There's all these different kind of variants of how do you separate the introductory people for the production use. This is a really big issue. Because you want people to try out your product to get a glimpse of it often, but at the same time, often you really want to extract rents from those people who end up using it for production use. There's a set of pricing strategies which are used for charging. Dollars per transaction or metering, sort of. To what degree is your service, for example, to what degree can people rent your product, as it were, so they're paying by hour of use, for example, or per transaction on it, for each document they create, or what have you, something along those lines. To what degree you've got sort of a software need where they pay a certain service fee to use your system for an open-ended period of time. Is it a fixed term license, or is it a license that expires after a year? Is it a per seat license? Is it per seat per year, for example, prices they have to pay you? Or they purchase the product, that's theirs, they can spread it to however many seats, they can use it however long, but they need to pay for upgrades. There's all these different schemes for how you work with them over time to kind of get a sustainable revenue stream on the one hand, but have a customer base that feels they're getting value for dollar on the other. Sometimes people will, for example, use value-derived pricing. So they'll charge more if it's being used more heavily, less if it's being less heavily. And there's certain types of there's certain types of products or services where you actually charge through value delivered in a way that can be measured. And then others, charge for underlying hardware put out or what have you to serve a customer. So there's a lot of financial sides, and depending on whether you're talking about a product or a service, depending on whether you talk about mass market or niche market, selling to enterprises or individuals, the issues here are somewhat different. There's certain licensing terms that you might think about for enterprise customers. No, that would actually be central for enterprise customers in terms of license management and so on. You'd never think about if you're selling apps to the mass market. You're not thinking about pricing or licensing terms like that. So just be aware, it's a broad world out there. And when you are thinking about starting a startup, ask yourself consciously, Are we a service company? Are we a product company? To what degree, I remember there was an incident where Bill Gates got together with some of the folks who were involved in Costco, for example, at one point. And, some lights turned on for him because he had been selling product as, sell Microsoft Office, you get this version, you run it as long as you want, and you pay if you want to upgrade, right? That was their model for many, many years. And then he started to realize, wait a minute, this model of subscriptions has a lot going for it compared to a product model. You can actually get value over time. People pay sort of on a yearly basis to be subscribed and to participate in it, and they're actually incentivized to invest more in it. So it's something like Costco. You're incentivized to buy lots through them because you're covering the cost of this basic subscription and so on. And that started Microsoft in a very different direction. I think this was mid-90s or so. And the point is, in software, you have a diversity of models, and it's worth being very conscious thinking through which of these sorts of models are the ones that you want to adopt. The other thing is that some of these things are easier than others for certain technologies. There are times you can do metering, and there are times you cannot do metering technically. Where it's very hard. With a web page, traditionally, it's been easy enough to capture a record of how many times your site is hit, but it's harder to know, for example, the degree to which someone is spending time with your web page after it's loaded into their browser. So there's only so much you can easily measure, and that goes along with this pricing strategy. There's a great book by Luke Holman, I think is the name, or Holman, which is about this kind of intersection of sort of the licensing terms and the business side with the technical side. It's called Beyond Software Architecture, and it's a very thought-provoking book on some of these sort of issues. Okay, let's talk about the legal side. The legal side is one that is often underappreciated and frankly often followed up by those on the software side. So one of the reasons it followed up is because often people engage in a more informal way early on with an entrepreneurial activity, and they love the sense of freedom and so on. They don't want to be burdened by paperwork associated with legal stuff. Another issue is that lawyers are very expensive, and they try to minimize cost by avoiding going and seeing the lawyers. They say, well, look, we can do this ourselves. We don't really need someone. All we need is having an agreement amongst each other. Well, you have to realize that there's some real issues of importance here. And if you don't get your sort of legal situation squared away properly, it raises some big risks. And two of the risks are, number one, you will have partner problems. You have problems with partners that rip apart the company that could have been avoided or at least settled in a clear way with appropriate legal documentation. Because people's ownership, people's role in the company is much more defined with the appropriate legal documents than if it's kind of just in a so-called agreement where different people may have different ideas, in fact. So one issue is that it can help prevent dissolution early on of a firm. In some cases, this is kind of a third one I'm going to be adding in here. In some cases, it can also impair getting an appropriate first client or set of clients on board, because they feel they really want to make sure that you're a legit outfit, you have proper incorporation documents, etc. A third issue, though, is that if you're thinking about further down the line where you might be target for a buyout, you'd really like a Google to buy you out as a firm. Those things happen. the quality of legal documents are going to be a big determiner whether that firm thinks that you're qualified to be bought out, or whether you are so risky to them that the buyout is called out. Okay? Big issue. And often those interact. So for example, one of the reasons buyouts fall through is because they get the wind that there may be a disgruntled partner and they don't want anything to do with it because they're afraid of lawsuits or the long reach of that person. If they buy it, then that person's going to have claim over their company, the company that's bought you. And that is something that means that they might not go forward with a buyout that would otherwise be possible. Buying out is the target of many small startups. They want to be bought out. Not that they want to leave it necessarily, but that's how they know they'll get a big infusion of dollars that will make them sustainable in the long term, and the founders will be very well compensated. So legal arrangements for a corporation often start with the incorporation of the company, and there's a very lightweight process you can go through to incorporate. It's a very straightforward process. You can incorporate as a name company. You can incorporate as a numbered company and have doing business as DBA names, which you use. Those are names for your firm, but fundamentally it's a numbered firm, so you can use this name in this context, that name in that context, and that's sometimes done. Okay? The name is not as important as the fact that you are incorporated with a certain legal structure too. So you have certain shareholders, you have certain corporate bylaws, etc. So in order to pull this together, you're going to have articles of incorporation or organization. These include shareholders' rules, directors, officers, and there's a lot of sort of legal, boilerplate that goes into those things. And often they're fairly straightforward, but you pay for them. You pay often a fair bit for them. There's corporate bylaws, which are often giving further rules for the corporation as to expectations or processes or what have you. And then there are contracts. And these are contracts that are, contract is between two parties, and often it's a contract between the firm and some of the founders of the firm and some of the employees or what have you. Now, one of the things that founders often want to see in these early documents is a recognition of their early investments. That, I invested $20,000 of my personal cash in this corporation. I want to see that acknowledged so that it's recognized as a debt by the company. It's a debt to me. Or I want to see it recognized because I receive equity for that. And one of the most important things that you document is who has what equity and on what vesting terms. What terms it is being delivered over time. Okay? You may also have delineation of things like rights of first refusal, so that if I sell equity, I can't just sell it to anyone on the street. It has to be sold preferentially to other partners, other founders, before selling to people on the street. And generally speaking, there's a distinction in these firms early on, like for the first few years, a real distinction between the founders versus staff. And often there are some people who are partners, some of them are founders, others are people who came on later. And then there's going to be others who are hired and being paid and compensated at market rates and don't receive nearly the level of equity and don't have nearly the say in the company. Many firms secure benefit these days with contingency clauses. You have clauses in your documents that say, in this condition, this will happen. In that condition, that will happen. So they're assuming not one fixed outcome, but in the event of a buyout, in the event of an early departure from the corporation, in the event of a death, etc. And they'll have clauses to anticipate these situations. There's also some issues with intellectual property issues that sometimes come up here, where people have prior claims. They had some idea and have been developing it, and they don't want it to cede to the company. So sometimes there's intellectual property sort of concerns that transcend the company. Now, one of the challenges for a young company that's just getting on its feet legally is that when you have big clients, this is specifically for this case of institutional clients, enterprise clients, for example, you're dealing with companies that may have, well, as one of the people I deal with, he says he has floors of lawyers down in Regina working for him. There's floors of lawyers in where he works. And if you're a small firm and you've got to negotiate with a firm that has floors of lawyers, often they can really push you around as a small firm. And what can I say? It's not fun. And you have to know when what you're gonna accept and when you're gonna break it. And you want an on-call lawyer who you can depend on, who's very good and can look over these documents. One of the things you got to realize is lawyers not all lawyers are the same. There's a phenomenon in sociology called homogenization of the other. And basically it posits that when we deal with people from a different culture or different background, we often homogenize them. We think they all are the same. And I'll tell you, from a lot of experience outside of computer science, there's a lot of people who kind of morph us computer scientists into one bucket. They don't call it hashing us to this bucket, but that's what they're doing. They have us all in the same hashed bucket. So they think we're all software engineers, or they think we're all AI people, or they think we're all network gurus, or something like that. The fact is that CS is diverse as a field, and the fact is law is diverse as a field. You'll have lawyers who specialize in corporate law, lawyers who specialize in startup law, lawyers who specialize in family law, lawyers who specialize in environmental law. There's all these different sub-areas, and you want someone who deals with startups, and ideally software startups, because the needs there are different than a construction startup. And so you want a lawyer that you could consult with who's been around the block a few times with software startups and is familiar with some of the unique issues, whether it's licensing or whether it has to do with partners, whether it has to do with sort of contracts with clients or service agreements, quality of service guarantees from software service providers. You want someone who knows that sort of space and is comfortable with it, okay? And that's not your average lawyer. You don't want to rely so heavily on your average lawyer, but rather you want to find more specialized lawyers. Entrepreneurship lawyers are also very valuable, even if they're not specialized in software entrepreneurship. Someone who's been through the entrepreneurship thing many times can be very, very valuable. Okay, written agreements. Written agreements are really important. They're important for common understanding as legal reference, and often people make the mistake of skipping. They feel uncomfortable asking their friends to put something in writing. It's easy to procrastinate on it, and they say, well, look, we can't afford a lawyer now. We're too busy. Let's not do it. There's a real danger here, and the real danger is that it can lead to conflict. That's perhaps the foremost danger, that it can lead to partners who have been on good terms and perhaps are the best of friends falling out. It can lead to threats from people who have been friends. It can lead to lawsuits against the company. I've seen all of this happen. Lost a best friend to this one time in my youth. Was threatened with legal action. And I've seen firms brought to court by disgruntled partners several times. So legal documentation of people's relationship to the company is very important. You need to have it in writing in a way that's clearly documented. You are advised to consult with a lawyer to make sure that it's tight, that it will hold water in court. These are kind of informal ways of saying, will it be legally respected? I mentioned to you last time a case, again in my youth, where we did a heck of a lot of work for a firm. We did a heck of a lot of work in anticipation of a firm with a anticipated partner who ended up pulling out. He had asked us to join him for this work, and then basically written a contract that was not legally enforceable. We didn't know that. Looked like a contract with big legal words to us, but we were told in passing it for judgment that it was not legally enforceable. So you want to be careful when you put together documents to make sure that they are legally sound, and to do that you need some lawyer's time. You might get that through an incubator, a local lawyer who's there. You might get it through a reliable family connection who's a lawyer, but it's really good if you can have someone who knows the entrepreneurship space quite well. Now, along these lines, you want some way in your legal documents, you want a clear path to conflict resolution. So it's one thing to get the documents in place to make sure everyone's on the same page, we all have the same explanations. We all have the same expectations. I remember one case, a colleague of mine, worked for a couple of years for a firm based on discussions that I was part of. I had been a partner early on, and I decided for some ethical reasons, I didn't want part of this firm. And I pulled out, and while I was threatened, it was obviously, so basically they threatened me with saying I had to sign a non-disclosure agreement upon pulling out. I said, no, I'm not going to sign a non-disclosure agreement, upon pulling out. I mean, the time to ask for that is before the information is disclosed. Thank you very much. I was threatened with a lawsuit, and I talked with a lawyer. I said, forget it. It's jokeable. It's laughable from a legal standpoint. So I didn't give in, and they never came to anything. But the person that did cause conflict a couple of years later with the same firm was someone that I had been in discussions with as a partner, and we all had an agreement, and I had notes on it at the time, notes that I shared for court later, a clear indication that we had all agreed to divide the equity up equally at that time. We'd all agreed to divide up the equity equally, and what we didn't have was legally signed documents demonstrating this. But we had a verbal agreement, and we had written notes on the meeting. One of the partners who was there, who outlasted me by 2 years, I think, he called me 2 years later, a year or two later. Could have been actually even a bit more than 2 years. He had been working for this firm with the clear indication of what his equity stake was. And it had been discussed verbally, it was in very clear agreement, because I had left as a partner, some of my equity went to them. And this was his motivation for doing it. I mean, he was older, he was in his 50s, I think, and he saw this as something that would, help put him through retirement and so on. The company was doing very well, still is doing very well. Still doing very well, multi-continental company now. And he worked for them, only to find out at some point when he kept on saying every 6 months or so, let's get this in writing, let's get it in writing, we really need to get it in writing. And he noted that there was some odd behavior by the other partners that he felt a little bit uncomfortable with, like he was not quite in their inner circle. And basically it came out that they said when all came down to it, that instead of having 25% equity, they viewed him as having 11% equity or something. He was absolutely livid. And they denied absolutely any discussion ever that he would have more than that. And he landed in court with them. Landed in court, and my notes from that meeting were part of the documentation, but it was a pretty weak sort of thing, because there weren't signed forms for it. It was he said, she said sort of things, and that was a very uncomfortable thing to try to take forward in a court of law. So the point is, you not only want clear documentation of these agreements, but you also want terms and conditions that lay out a clear plan for conflict resolution. So you want a delineated, escalating plan for how you're going to settle a dispute. Ladies and gentlemen, it is not good for anyone that disputes end up in courts. And there's many options before you get to courts which can allow you to pursue a dispute with appropriate levels of appropriate levels of arbitration or mediation that are well short of that. The idea here is that you want rules for this. You want rules that will elevate concerns early on in a way that they won't propagate to a much bigger thing. Okay. And having a shared agreement on dispute resolution says, look, if we disagree at some point, these are the steps we will go through. We will first discuss it among ourselves, and before we take it to mediation, we will see if that has brought anything. At least twice we'll discuss it among each other, and then we'll give notification at least a month ahead. We're headed for mediation to give some time for further workup. Then it goes to mediation, which is a voluntary activity. It's voluntary type of resolution, but you see if someone, a trusted third party, can help resolve it. And then you escalate to level of arbitration, where it is binding, and it's more restrictive. And only then do you actually go to litigation. And you require people, as part of the dispute resolution agreement, to agree to escalate only in that order, so that you don't get slapped with a lawsuit. You get, instead, some way of heading off these issues early on in a way that can be managed. Okay? So know about an issue early. Just like a defect in your program, you learn about the issue early, and you ask, how do we address this defect? And you ask, how do we fix the process so this won't happen again? Same thing here. Same principle here. Same principle in life, in fact. Okay. So financial side, legal side. I'd like to talk about marketing and sales a little bit. So basically what you're trying to do with marketing is attract customers. Maybe it's obvious to all of you. You're trying to promote your product or service to let customers be aware of it, let them know how attractive it is, how the advantages it offers vis-a-vis competitive products or alternatives, etc. And there's many avenues for pursuing this. Word of mouth, trade shows, newsletters, conferences that you put on. I remember doing that as a young firm. We put on a conference. It was well attended from all around the country, and it was well attended by people who are interested in our types of services, who are interested in the sort of types of ideas that we were talking about, that we were trying to address with our services. In short, it brought people who were potentially qualified customers to us so that we could interact with them. And they paid to do it. It's a conference. Not a bad deal overall. Conferences can be very attractive because you bring in the very people you need to talk with, and you often help them learn about what sorts of strengths you're offering in a way that when they go away, they feel a lot more qualified to move forward. And in some cases, they ask you to help out with contracts immediately afterwards. You can do advertising. These days, a lot of it is done via social media. You can buy Facebook ads targeted by geography, targeted by demographic group. You can advertise, in short, in a quite targeted way. You could do Google advertising based on characteristics of individuals out there, etc. You can also help promote customer testimonials, and still a role there called calling people up and letting them know about your firm. So here you're often cultivating customers. You want them to get them to qualified customers. They have an understanding of what you're offering. They understand how it meets their needs. You're confident it does meet their needs, etc. And getting this word out there is often key. getting people aware of what you are offering, and so that it's not hidden, so that they're aware that it's an option for them. But there often is a tension here with sales. Okay, the deal with sales is going from awareness, and often qualified awareness, people who understand, their needs and how it maps to yours, for example, and getting it to the point where you actually close the deal. You actually sell it to them. You clinch the deal. You're able to realize that as an actual customer, not just a potential customer. And a key concept here is that sales are best not conceived of as isolated events. Oh, you got this customer, that one. They're really a pipeline. And it's a pipeline often with a long, mixed metaphors. The other metaphor that's used often is a long runway. It takes a long time to take off. There's a long pipeline associated with it. You're talking with some people early on. Some people you're learning more about their particular needs. Others you're negotiating with terms. Others you've got to the point where they're just checking out your qualifications, insurance-wise or what have you, that you're a safe and approved vendor. And then finally the sale goes through. And this might be a 6-month pipeline. 6 months can be a long time in the life of a startup. If you have a burn rate, a rate of going through cash, which is too high, you might not survive 6 months. And the length of the sales pipeline is often going to be a real issue, something that's very much on your mind. Key skills on the sales side are very different from marketing side. On marketing, there's a real tension here, because marketing, you're trying to draw the customer in, and often what goes on with the marketing folks is that they want the customer to not be scared off early on. They want to lure the customer in, give them a sense this is going to be great. You're going to gain so much for this. It's going to be cheap for you, and it's going to be quick and almost painless, and you're going to get great things out of this. Or this is going to be so much better than your existing products. Now, sales, they've got to do the negotiation, and they're trying to get some revenue for this. So they want the customer, yes, to be happy, but they want to get some money for it. And here, the sales side is often in tension with the marketing side, because the marketing person just, has promised the moon to this customer, and the salesperson said, well, yes, but did they tell you it would cost X? Or did they tell you we can't deliver it before 6 months from now because we're filled with other customers? So the sales folks are negotiating, and they're negotiating the timing of delivery, the cost of delivery, the terms of delivery, the features that are in there, the things that you have to do for custom development for the client. And from the sales perspective, you don't want to promise too much. Marketing, you want to promise everything. You want to say, oh, it's great. The marketers I'm talking about are typically promising everything. The salespeople are saying, no, wait a minute, yes, we could add that feature, but that will add another 3 months to the schedule. And the client there, needs to negotiate that, whether that's acceptable. So the salespeople are often much more, when done properly, they're much more sort of cautious in what they're promising, because they know they have to deliver. They have to deliver on this, and if they promise something for delivery next month with lots and lots of features for cheap, they're going to kill the company, because the company's not going to be able to afford that. They have to deliver for these other clients. This is not enough money to provide for the sustainable upkeep of the company, and there's no way we can do it, in that time with those features. So the sales folks are much more involved in negotiation and balancing the needs of the clients. They need to understand the client constraints and structure, what the client can afford, what they can't afford, and they have to understand the give and take in their own organization. The developers, what can you folks do? Could you folks do this in a month? Could you add this feature in? The client would be really happy, but can you do it? And often the sales have to sometimes tell the client, look, this is not possible, we could do it, it would take longer for you. for us to do these features, but we could do these others, you know, earlier and cheaper, etc. You know, sales in some small firms, they're done very much on a catch-as-catch-can basis. They're done sometimes opportunistically to get a bit of money into the company, but that can cause real problems because it gets the developers going off in a different direction. You can learn a lot from sales failures. Why did this fail? Why did this fall through? And I'll tell you, these small firms that are selling to larger clients, you know, tens of thousands of dollars each or hundreds of thousands each contract, which is the type of work I've often been in, you're analyzing each sale. Like, why did this customer disappear? They were talking with us for so long. They got to the end of the sales pipeline, then they just are not returning our calls. What's going on here? You're trying to understand what were the key points that made them uncomfortable so that you can work to try to, in the future, address those points. And one of the tricks that companies will use here, which I'm not that keen about, but if you can do it, and if they feel they're getting value, then it's really good. You just don't want to hoodwink them with it. If you can get prospective clients to pay for visits to talk about issues, to actually pay for you to come there and educate them about your product, it may be worth it to them because they know with greater clarity, do they want your product versus another? And you learn a lot more about them and you're actually getting paid to come. So there's a firm here that whose proposed contract I reviewed in the past month or so, which was proposing to get paid $70,000 to consult for an organization here in Saskatchewan to tell them about how good their product was and how evaluate its fit to their needs. And that's a pretty good deal. $70,000 for a firm like that probably is quite a lot. I didn't think it offered enough value to the client. I said, from my perspective, it's not worth it. Okay, now, the first client or two for a small firm, if you're dealing with larger clients, institutional clients, this is really important. It's difficult to price this because it's so strategic. You want to get the right client. You don't want to be scared away just because of the price. Often the company, the small startup will give extra latitude for a good price here. Meanwhile, the companies that are buying it, the companies that are purchasing it, realize that they're in a risky space because you're their first client. They realize to some degree they've got you over a barrel, and you don't have testimonials to how good this is, and they're probably not going to pay an awful lot. Ladies and gentlemen, one firm that I was involved with, not as a partner, but I helped give some advice to them. They had a great first client and they blew it. They didn't manage the technical risk enough. They charged too little. They couldn't pay the technical people to guarantee the quality that I recommended. They had them only on a part-time basis, a retainer basis. They didn't have them on full-time in a way that would have allowed them to deal with the technical risks. And basically, some of those risks hit in terms of scalability. They couldn't get the technical people to fix it. The client was unhappy. The client canceled the contract. End of the company. That's it. The company reputation was shot. It couldn't pull out of it, and basically they ended up dispersing as a company. Failure to manage risk, yes, but if you look at the root causes further, the reason they couldn't manage the technical risk is because they didn't have the technical people full time. Why didn't they have them full time? They didn't have them full time because they weren't charging the client enough. They couldn't afford to pay them full time. They couldn't afford to bring them on with equity full time. So it's critical you impress this first client. They have to be very pleased. You want to give good testimonial, good reputation in the industry. You have credibility. A good first client can take you far, far down the road. A bad first client often causes you to shutter your windows and doors. Often word of mouth is how you hear about this client. Often it's a special relationship, and sometimes it breaks the company. First client, ladies and gentlemen. Different matter altogether if you're selling to the mass market. I mean, if you're selling apps on, Google Play, you're not going to be as worried about the first client. Sure, you want to make sure that you've got them and so on, but you're hoping there's many clients. It's more these big ticket payments, or if you have something that eventually you want to take mass market, but you need those clients to help you build up the code base for it, etc. Okay, let's talk about management issues. So there's some real managerial issues with small startups, and time is short here, so I'm going to have to be careful here. You're trying to balance. This is really tricky. Balance keeping a predefined plan. We have this in mind. This is what our vision was, versus doing what we now understand the market seems to most need. Versus doing what our strengths allow. Gosh, we have some really good developers who know these technologies inside out. We can do something that's kind of related, but it's different, and go off in that direction. So often you're balancing kind of what I can do easily, what the market seems to me to need most now, versus what we have envisioned for longer term. And it's hard. You're balancing short and long term, you're managing uncertainty. Maybe our vision is not ultimately realizable. Maybe we have to be realistic and do what we're learning the market really wants. So you're managing this uncertainty. And from a managerial standpoint, at some point, often the key developer will not infrequently end up being the CEO or CTO. And one of their challenges is they've got to avoid getting involved in all of the details of the technical delivery. It's kind of like project managers on your teams. Here, a lot of benefit comes. Remember, one of my best managers in the corporate sphere, probably my best one, although I've had some others that are very good. He was just unbelievable. He was a former IBM executive, but he was just unbelievably effective at listening to concerns, eliciting them, and facilitating your work. So basically his job, he said, look, my job is to make sure that you can do your job efficiently. I'm here to remove barriers for you. I'm here to buffer you from the client so that you don't get pestered. I'm here to straighten out issues that are taking your time. I'm here to offload things from you so that you can do your job most efficiently. And that's a frequent attitude from a really good manager. They're not here to tell you predominantly to tell you what to do every minute of your time. They're here to remove barriers and let you shine. Okay, technically. Good manager often. So there's some additional challenges related to this with sort of supervision of staff, guaranteeing quality delivery, preventing burnout. This is a real issue in small companies. You get people just working all hours, and they can only take it for a certain amount of time before they may look elsewhere. And then heading off partner problems early on. That same manager in a different firm, he went on to run a different firm. He was involved in that lawsuit by someone who he thought was his friend as well as a partner, who smelled money and went at them in a lawsuit. Really hurt him. Okay, so early on, people are often aiming for an end game of some sort, buyout, going really big, partnering up with another firm, having technology sharing, for example, with another firm. But you should realize that firms end in very different ways. Some de-incorporate, some simply sort of fold and don't go bother with the incorporation. Some are bought out. Some go on and flourish as larger companies. Some are merged with others. Early on, human resources are often of key concern. I mentioned the distinction between partners who own a large set of the firm, really have ownership of it in a sense, versus employees who are paid, who are lower risk, and at lower risk of being paid full salaries, whereas partners are earning a lot less money-wise, but they're getting more equity. Hiring is often tricky. The first several employees are key for setting the firm's culture, for establishing a culture of quality and excellence, of care, etc., or of complaints. You got to be careful. And often, based on the risk of the firm, you get different types. Risk lovers, people who are secure and looking for a challenge. They've already been in the software industry for 20 years. They've done very well. Now they're looking for something quite different. People who have little to lose. They're fresh out of school. They're willing to try something. People who are considering it sound fascinated, but they've got big stakes elsewhere. And then a lot of firms end up hiring within friends and family, sort of in a way that's sometimes termed nepotism. So there's no shortage of people hiring their kids or hiring a brother or what have you. In addition to those core employees, you typically want on-call staff for legal and accountants, people who can do your taxes, for example. If you're dealing with international sales, you'll be dealing with international accounting. I run a firm that's here in Canada, but also has a U.S. side, and I have to pay U.S. taxes and Canadian taxes both on it, and I need to work with appropriate accountants. There's some very good firms in town. M&P has done me very well, certainly. You often want someone on call who's a domain expert. If you are working in the real estate area, you want someone who knows the real estate industry inside out. If you're working to sell product to dentist's office, you want someone who really is familiar with all the ins and outs of the dental industry, the different types of subclinics, etc. Ideally, you'd like someone on call who can help you with business development, how you grow the business, how you expand it, at what point you put in place extra structure, because as the business grows, it gets often more structured. Graphics artists and designers for sort of aesthetics, and the role, incubators can help with these. Sometimes these people are brought on in equity, sometimes they're brought on for pay. You can get an accountant sometime on equity, they earn some equity, sometimes it's on the pay side. And there's a set of topics that I'm not going to go into here, but I may touch on before the course is over next week on sort of risk and reward issues having to do with sustainability, fatigue, burnout, and turnover, aligning incentives between parties and balancing risks and rewards. Space, sharing space is a good option. Informal, it's hard to meet with clients. I remember one firm, the CEO for a while was running it out of a closet, and one of the things that was very painful about that is they had a big client from a firm whose revenues were in the billions of dollars, and they wanted to visit the corporate offices, and opening the closet was not what they had in mind. There's another reason that incubators, co-working spaces, where you share space and you have access to a boardroom, can be very, very attractive. You have a good, presentable place to bring for clients, bring for potential firms that are interested in partnerships, and that you can have meetings for your firms, but you're not for your employees, but you're not renting it all the time. I think the issue of space is a big cost, and it's one of the ones that bears a lot on costs early on within firms. Okay, we don't have time to cover these. I'll just mention in this final section, I talk about a set of issues that change over time. What are some major issues that come up at different stages of a firm's growth? And if you're interested in these things, you can look over them. The final thing that I will just mention here is a set of resources that you may find of use, and then I give a set of references. Joe Hadzima was the person who drew up our corporate contracts 25 years ago, when not quite 25, 24 years ago, for my first startup. Did a great job. I have shared those with students before, our corporate articles of incorporation, corporate bylaws. They are very, very sort of professionally done documents. And he has a great website associated with the MIT Entrepreneurs Club. And this Technology Entrepreneurs Guidebook by PricewaterhouseCoopers, a big consulting firm, is also quite good, and I'd recommend it. And this entrepreneurship site at MIT, one of my previous presidents of our company is the head of the Entrepreneurship Club at MIT these days, and they've done a great job pulling together some materials. I'd also recommend Cusimano's book on the business of software, which basically looks at the software business from the standpoint of entrepreneurship, yes, but also just business processes, and helps parsing the business world out there as far as how it uses and manufactures software. A bit dated, but good. Okay, that's all we have time for today. Thank you very much for your attention, and we'll go on next time to different material.